All right, you guys, welcome to another video. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. Okay, so for this video, we are going to be discussing the history of religion and really trying to get a deeper understanding of when I say the history of religion, sorry, we're going to get into worship and what is worship and looking at the history of it. Okay. And we're going to define it because I know worship is a wide term, right? But for this discussion, we're going to narrow it down and we're going to talk about a specific worship. Okay. I'll get into that in a moment. But this video here is primarily being made for our research group that we have on Samba Journeys. Our research group basically is simply for people who just have a lot of questions as it pertains to the Bible, Christianity, and people who are making the choice and decision to say, hey, listen, there's a lot of things I was told that's just not true. I'm coming to understand that. And it's not a place where we're bashing anybody. You know, ultimately, what you choose to believe is your choice. So nobody's going to bash you for that. But what we wanted to do is to create a place where people can ask questions, we can explore without people feeling like you're going to get beat up if you're, how dare you question this or how dare you question that. This is why I don't put videos like this on our main channel, like in the open, because we got too many people out there that are like that. And what it does is it intimidates people who have questions. You understand? And we're not here to, I'm not here to position myself as if I got all the answers, because I don't. Nobody does. But it's, but us coming together and actually creating a place where we can ask questions, it does help people in general, to feel a little bit more comfortable and a little more confident to know what you believe versus what you don't believe. And, and our belief system should be ultimately based on truth, right? So that's what we try to do. That's what we try to establish in our research group. So if you're interested, make sure you sign up for that. And there's an intro video. Just watch the video. I explain everything on there and get you all connected up and everything. So it's, it's not like I'm a pastor and I'm talking to the people down below. No, this is all collective. So you're more than welcome to join us. Okay. All right. So we're going to get into worship. Okay. Now, when we talk about worship in this discussion, what we first have to understand is that worship is, we're going to discuss it within the context of Christianity. All right. We understand that there's all types of worship out there because these different cultures, they worship their gods, their deities, and they do all kinds of ways of worship means different things. But in this conversation, we're going to talk about it within the context of Christianity. All right. Now, before I continue, I just remembered that this video is going to definitely be a talking head video, meaning that you're going to see this most of the time. Okay. My face. All right. There's going to be a few things I will put on the screen, but it's going to be one that, there's going to be a lot of information given. And I'm saying this because for those that have been following our platform for some time, I have all these slides and I'll do all this stuff. I didn't do that this time. Okay. But you will be given a lot of information that you can look up on your own. And that's it. Also, you may have saw me in the beginning, I hit that record button back there. I'll try to make this available audio as well so that you can listen to it that way. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and get into it. That's enough of the preliminary stuff. So why is it that we have to look at worship through the lens of Christianity? Well, not so much the why, but the reason why I would say that we have to look at worship within the framework of Christianity is, number one, of course, is that's for most of us, that's how we've been introduced to worship, the whole concept of worship in the first place. Okay. And I'm talking, we're in the 21st century, 20th century, whatever century this is. Most of us, I would say the overwhelming majority, when we think of worship, that's how we've been introduced to it. Right. But so if we're looking at it through Christianity, we also have to understand that where did Christianity originate? For the most part, Christianity is a Western based belief system. Now, I know, and I've talked about this many times, there's people out here that have made attempts to say, no, Christianity came out of Africa. Technically, there's some truth to that, because when you look at the Christianity, when people who say that, they oftentimes are looking at Egypt. There's a lot of aspects of Christianity that are Egyptian inspired. That's true. You know what I mean? So where's Egypt in Africa? However, who was in control of Egypt during those times? In those times, when we're talking about when the Bible was slowly being constructed and put together, by that time you had these European nations that were involved in leadership and all of that there. So you got to make sure you include that too. All right. So when we look at so to understand this whole concept of worship, we have to look through the lens of Western society, Western culture, their belief systems, and all of that. So I think that clears the deck from looking at all these other things. Okay, so we're going to get to that in a moment. Okay, all right. So the first thing I want you to look at is, have you ever heard of this thing called Greek tragedy? Well, Greek tragedy is a genre of, let's say, drama, if you will, that comes out of Greece, right? And Greece, one of the things that Greece was known for were their plays, right? And their plays oftentimes, they weren't just think of Netflix. They were like the early form of Netflix. It was just one channel though. Okay. And so you would go into the amphitheaters, they would have, all the people there. And then you got the people on the stage, down below, you're looking at them and they, sometimes they're wearing masks. They got all kinds of stuff going. It was a spectacle, but the messaging that was baked into these plays, it wasn't just for entertainment. Oftentimes these plays were used as a way of communicating the thoughts and the values of government. All right. And so I think this is going to be a good place to start as we get into understanding a little bit of this whole concept of worship. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at, the structure of Greek tragedy. All right. Let me get this up here. And I'm using Chat GPT. All right. So I'm just going to put it up here so you can kind of follow along and you ain't necessarily looking at my face the whole time. Okay. So I'm going to put this up here. Chat GPT does a pretty good job. I'll give it that. All right. All right. So Greek tragedy, let's go ahead and read it. It says Greek tragedy is a dramatic genre that originated in ancient Greece around 5th century BCE. Primarily in Athens, these plays centered on profound themes, often exploring the human condition, moral struggles, fate, and the relationship between humans and the gods. Greek tragedies were performed during religious festivals dedicated to Dionysus. Now, Dionysus, remember, we've done a couple of videos on Dionysus and the cult of Dionysus and the comparisons between the cult of Dionysus, who Dionysus was, and Christianity. A lot of what we know today as Christianity actually was inspired by the cult of Dionysus. We've talked about this before. This is actually going to come up a little bit later in a very surprising way. But let's continue. Festivals dedicated to Dionysus, the god of wine, fertility, and revelry, and were meant to provoke intense emotional responses in audiences through the portrayal of human suffering, moral conflict, and inevitable downfall. All right. I hope you're paying attention. All right. So let's get into some of the details. These are the key elements of Greek tragedy. All right. Noble or high-born protagonists. Greek tragedies often feature protagonists of noble birth or high social standing, like kings, queens, or warriors. This choice heightened the drama, as the greater of the character's status, the more tragic and impactful their fall would be. Okay, I hope you're paying attention to this. All right. Examples include characters like Oedipus, let's see, the king of Thebes and Oedipus Rex, and let's see, Agamemnon. I hope I'm saying the king of Mycenae and whatever. Okay, so they give there's a couple of examples here. So number one is a noble or highborn protagonist. Number two, there's always a tragic fall. The central character in a Greek tragedy usually possesses a tragic flaw or error in judgment, known as hamartia. This flaw often leads to the character's downfall. In Oedipus Rex, for instance, Oedipus' hubris, excessive pride, and his determination to defy fate ultimately results in his tragic realization and punishment. The concept highlights the idea that personal failings and mistakes, often motivated by good intentions, can have devastating consequences. That's number two. Number three, inevitability of fate. Greek tragedy often emphasizes the concept of fate as a powerful and unavoidable force. The characters are typically bound by fate, no matter their actions or intentions. The inevitability of fate serves as a reminder of humanity's limitations and the God's control over human destiny. This theme can be seen in, and they name some examples, okay? All right, number four, suffering and downfall. Now, I hope as I'm reading through this, make sure you use your brain. Allow your brain to go a little bit, because I think for some of you already, you're hearing some themes from something else. And we're going to do that comparison in a moment. Suffering and downfall. The main character in a Greek tragedy undergoes intense suffering, usually as a direct result of their own actions or tragic flaw. This suffering, however, is not just physical or external. It often includes an emotional or spiritual dimension, where the protagonist gains awareness of their failings or the truth behind their actions. This self-awareness or tragic realization often comes too late for the character to avoid their tragic fate. Catharsis. According to Aristotle's Politics, one of the main goals of Greek tragedy was to invoke pity and fear in the audience. I hope you're listening to me. Leading to a cathartic experience. By watching the tragic hero's journey, the audience experiences an emotional release, or catharsis. Oh, I hope you guys are listening, which leaves them with a sense of purification and emotional renewal. All right. Number six, role of the chorus. All right. The chorus in Greek tragedy is a group of actors who comment on the action, provide background information, and reflect on the moral implications of the events unfolding in the play. The chorus represents the collective voice of society, often serving as a moral compass and enhancing the play's themes through song and dialogue. So when we hear the chorus or choir, the choir actually represents the people. Okay? So what we see today in Christian music or gospel music, whatever, when you see the choir is actually a representation of the people. Now, I know I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm just going to go ahead. I'm going to go there for a moment. So in many of these black choirs, for example, what do you see? You got a lot of gay men and you got a lot of women who are lesbians, all right, among some other stuff going on there, right? But we'll get back to that in a moment. But understand, but the whole concept of a choir, it actually came from this. This is where it came from. It didn't come from Africa. It didn't come from anywhere else. The Greeks and the Romans were the ones that brought this whole concept of a choir. All right, let's go. The chorus often mediates between the audience and the characters, guiding the audience's emotional response to the tragedy. Oh my goodness. Anyway, structure of Greek tragedy. Greek tragedies were typically structured in a set format. A prologue, a monologue, or a dialogue that introduces the play's settings and central theme. Parados, the entry song of the chorus, setting the tone and offering background information. I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. So, parados, you're introducing, you're setting the tone. All right. Episodes. I'm gonna do a series on why you need to continue to give in an offering. Touch 3 people and say this. Episodes. All right. The main sections of the play where characters engage in dialogue and actions that advance the plot. All right. Stasimon. All right. Choral odes that reflect on the events of the preceding episode, helping the audience process what has happened. All right. Exodus, the concluding scene where the tragedy's resolution or moral lesson is revealed. Okay. And then they give some examples of some of these plays, right? These Greek tragedies. Okay. All right. So there we go. So far, I think we're kind of painting a picture here of the Greek tragedy. And and you may be asking at this point, again, what does this got to do with worship? Well, we're given a sneak peek already because you heard the part about the chorus, right? Well, we're going to delve into that in a moment. But first, what I want to do now is, now that we've seen the definition of the Greek tragedy, now what we're going to do is we're going to do a comparison between the Greek tragedy and the biblical narrative or story of Jesus. Okay, so let's go back and we're going to look at that. Okay, let's go. Okay, so here we go. The noble protagonist. Remember now, these are the same points that we just covered, okay? But now we're going to look at it within the framework of the narrative of Jesus, okay? The Greek tragedy, the protagonist is often a figure of noble birth or high status whose downfall has significant consequences. Now, when you look at Jesus, Jesus is portrayed as the Son of God, a divine figure with a unique status in the religious and social context of his time. His role as the Messiah places him in a position of great importance, and his suffering carries profound implications for humanity. All right. Number 2, tragic flaw. All right. Greek tragedy. The hero typically possesses a tragic flaw that leads to their downfall. And then now comparing that to Jesus, while Jesus does not exhibit a tragic flaw in the same way as a Greek tragic hero, his commitment to his mission and willingness to challenge authority could be viewed as a form of tragic dedication. His unwavering commitment to the truth and his message ultimately leads to his crucifixion, emphasizing the tension between divine purpose and human opposition. Number 3, inevitability of fate. Greek tragedy. Characters often face a premeditated fate, with their actions leading to inevitable consequences. And look at the story of Jesus. The narrative of Jesus includes the prophecy of his suffering and death, indicating that his crucifixion was part of God's plan for redemption. This sense of foreordained fate echoes the Greek tragedy's theme of inescapable destiny. Now, let me stop here for a second here. Now, you may be asking again, okay, so why are we, what do the Greeks got to do with this? The Greeks got everything to do with this. Literally everything. Your New Testament in of itself was written in Greek. All right. The translation stuff, it was Greek. The Greeks play a critical role in putting together your Bible. Okay. So when you talk about the Greek tragedy coming in about the 5th century, well, that's right around the time of the early church. So again, what we know today as Christianity was heavily influenced by Greek and Roman culture. All right, and we get into this. We've gotten into this in other videos, and we've talked about this. So anybody that's watching or listening to this, and you may want, say, well, maybe they're just copying what Christianity was doing. No, they established Christianity. These people are the ones that established it. Okay? And some people, they don't want to accept that, but it's historically true. All right? Let's continue. Number 4, suffering and downfall. Greek tragedy. The main character experiences intense suffering, often leading to a tragic realization and downfall. And then now we look at the story of Jesus. The passion narrative, the events leading to Jesus's crucifixion, vividly portrays his suffering, betrayal, and ultimate death. His emotional and physical agony in the Garden of Gethsemane and his crucifixion can be seen as a culmination of this suffering, aligning with the tragic elements of personal sacrifice and suffering inherent in Greek tragedy. Catharsis. Let's see. I say Catharsis. It's not that. It's catharsis. Catharsis. Sorry. Greek tragedy. The audience experiences catharsis through the emotions of pity and fear evoked by the tragic hero's plight. This catharsis is going to be a very, very, very important key to everything we're going to be talking about today. Very important. Okay. Now let's look at Jesus. The crucifixion of Jesus elicits profound emotional responses from believers, including sorrow for his suffering and recognition of his sacrifice for humanity's sins. This experience often leads to feelings of redemption and spiritual renewal, paralleling the cathartic experience of Greek audiences. So again, the Greeks in their plays, in these Greek tragedies, one of the goals was to get people so emotionally invested in the story, in the narrative, that once these people walked out, it wasn't just a one-dimensional thing where they just said, oh, that was a great movie, let me click, swipe, and go to the next movie. No, they wanted people, when they saw this story, when they sat down and they watched this whole presentation, they wanted people to walk out and this story has now become a part of them. And it was reinforced by the choir, which represents the people, right? And then the music and the special effects and all that other stuff and the whole dramatic stuff. They wanted people to be bought in to the narrative, all right? And that's what this catharsis, that's what that is about, okay? All right, let's move on. Number 6, moral and theological themes. Greek tragedy often explores complex moral issues, the nature of justice, and the human condition. And then you look at comparing that to Jesus. The teachings and actions of Jesus frequently addresses themes of justice, mercy, forgiveness, and the nature of love. His life and death provokes reflection on moral choices, divine justice, and human failings, similar to the moral dilemmas presented in Greek tragedies. Number 7, we're almost finished here. The role of the chorus. Greek tragedy. The chorus serves as a commentator on the action, reflecting societal values and moral questions. And then as it pertains to Jesus, while not a direct parallel, the followers of Jesus and the early Christian community can be seen as a chorus that responds to his teachings, reflecting on his actions and the implications of his sacrifice. Their interpretations and proclamations of his significance echo the moral commentary of the Greek chorus, which, yes, that's an aspect of it. That's true. But you can later on, as you start moving into, once the Church of Rome was set up, what we know today as the Catholic Church, the choir played a very significant role in echoing what the Pope had declared. You understand? So you can add that in there as well. And then number 8, resolution and redemption. Greek tragedy, the resolution often includes a sense of moral order being restored despite the tragedy. And then when you look at Jesus and how this parallels, the resurrection of Jesus offers a powerful resolution that transcends his tragic suffering. It affirms themes of hope, redemption, and the promise of eternal life, providing believers with a profound sense of closure and meaning similar to the resolutions found in some Greek tragedies that restore order or understanding following chaos. So as you can see here, this thing here, I mean, it's just already we're seeing the parallels on. Now we're starting to lay the foundation. As you're listening to what I'm saying here, we're starting to get into worship. But in order to understand worship, what is being worshipped? Do you understand what I'm saying? And so this is why we want to start here in this whole concept of getting people bought in and understanding Christianity's relationship to early Greek and Roman culture. All right, so let's move on here, and we're going to define catharsis. All right, so let's get to catharsis, and that, like I said again, this is something that's very, 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 very important. Okay, like I said, we're doing a lot of reading here, and we're gonna get to it. All right, let's get this up here. All right. What is catharsis? It's a concept in psychology and art referring to the process of releasing and thereby providing relief from strong or repressed emotions. Oh, I want you to listen to me today. The term originates from the Greek word catharsis, spelled with a K, meaning cleansing or purging. In its classical sense, catharsis is the emotional release that audiences experience through engagement with art, especially tragedy, that allows them to confront intense emotions like fear, pity, or sorrow in a controlled, safe setting. All right, so for example, oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. I just give myself to you, Father. Oh, hallelujah, hallelujah. Oh, hallelujah. I just give you praise. Hallelujah. That's catharsis. All right. That's what that is. It's like you're digging deep emotionally to get, and you're searching for that part where you can just do a full release, because it starts off very slow, right? You praising or whatever, and then they start, okay, y'all, we're going to dig deep here. We're going to get into deep worship. We're going to enter into the Holy of Holies now. That's what we're going now. We're going into deep worship now. And so that's when people start getting into, oh, hallelujah. Oh, I give you glory. I give you praise. I give you honor, but you alone are worthy to be praised. This is catharsis, all right? All right. In the context of ancient Greek theater, catharsis is central to understanding why tragic plays were so significant. Aristotle was the first to formalize this concept in the work for his work, Poetics, hope I'm saying that right, where he described how tragedies achieve catharsis by arousing pity and fear in the audience. This emotional journey leads to a purification or relief in these feelings, leaving the audience with a sense of emotional clarity and balance. Here's how catharsis function in Greek plays. All right. And this is we're getting in deep here. Okay. Audience emotional involvement. Greek tragedies often dealt with themes of loss, betrayal, moral conflict, and the consequences of human hubris. By watching a protagonist suffer and grapple with these profound issues, the audience could experience pity for the character's plight and fear for the potential consequences or fate of those involved. This intense empathy or pity of fear created a bond between the audience and the characters. All right. So in the area of Christianity, when you're dealing with worship, what's one of the things in worship? What do they focus on? the death of Jesus. They always focus on the death of Jesus. Oh, he was wounded for your transgressions. Oh, he went, all the chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes, we were healed. It was the stripes that was put on his back. When they whipped him, they kept whipping him, and the blood just splattered all over the place, and they put the crown of thorns on him. He was doing that for you. Why? Because you were born into sin. You are the sinner. You are the one that you are the sinner. You're the one that this man came from glory, and he came down to this little old earth, to us puny little humans, so that he can be whipped and beaten and tortured and ultimately hung on a cross for you and for me. Oh, and that's the process, okay? To get you involved, to get you bought in, to make you feel like, oh, hey, wow, this man did this for me? For me? That's the whole thing. And this connects to part number 2, the purging process. As the plot unfolded, often leading to the protagonist's downfall or a tragic revelation, audiences would experience a release of these emotions. Hopefully the adults are in the room today, because we are going to touch on something there that it's going to be adults only. Okay. I'm going to be as kind of professional about it as possible. Okay. Through this process, viewers could confront their own inner struggles and fears in a contained way, achieving a sense of mental and emotional relief. Number 3, the role of myth and universal themes. Greek tragedies often drew upon familiar mythological stories that explored timeless human experiences. These universally recognizable tales allowed audiences to process their emotions by seeing their own fears, losses, and in moral dilemmas represented on stage. This is why, ladies and gentlemen, every time you go to church, you're hearing the same stories over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. They're not telling you anything new. It's the same stories. They're always talking about who? David. They're always going to talk about Moses. They're always going to talk about Aaron. They're always going to talk about Abraham. They're always going to talk about the same people over and over again. All right. They got to keep enforcing this over and over again. And the purpose of enforcing that over and over again is so that you can see yourself in them. The preacher or the pastor, when he's up there or she's up there, the whole point of the sermon is to get you emotionally connected to try to get you to see yourself in John, to try to get yourself to see yourself in Abraham, to try to get you to see yourself in Moses, to try to get you to see yourself in whomever it is that they're talking about in the Bible. That is the whole driver of preachers and pastors when they get up there, is to make you see yourself in these people so that there's an emotional connection in your bought end. You understand what I'm saying? Let's continue. Let's see. Social and moral instruction. Beyond emotional purging, Greek tragedy served as moral and philosophical reflections on human behavior, fate, and the God's role in human life. Catharsis thus had a dual function, providing personal emotional release and reinforcing shared social and ethical values. All right. So there you go. So now we have an understanding of that, and hopefully you're understanding, you're seeing the parallel with what was being done in Greek culture and what we see today in the church, all right, in Christianity. And, we're still moving the dial. We're moving closer to getting to this whole worship thing here. Okay, now we're going to look at the roots of Christian worship, all right? Let's go now to this other part that I have here. Okay, so Christianity, when you do look at Christianity from a historical standpoint, yes, as I said earlier, it has direct ties to Greek and Roman culture. Christianity didn't start off, as much as people would like to believe, as this purist kind of thing, that kind of belief system that fell out of the sky and and it was just 100% pure. It wasn't influenced by anything at all, nothing at all as it pertains to society or culture or anything like that. This is literally a belief system that fell out of the sky. That's a bunch of nonsense, and it's a complete lie. All right. Christianity in of itself was built on and with the assistance of Greek and Roman culture and Mesopotamian culture. We'll touch on that in a little bit. Okay. So it was a hodgepodge of different belief systems that were already in existence. And so over time, as Christianity began to move in the direction of being monotheistic, meaning that they only serve one God, even though that is true, a lot of the practices that were used to worship those other gods, they all folded under this one God, all right, who is Yahweh. All right, we've talked about that. Okay, so Christianity, again, is a hodgepodge of different belief systems. All right. All right. So now let's take a look at this. We're going to read this here, and we're going to start looking. You're going to notice we're going to start moving into the role of women in worship, again, as it pertains to the context of a Western, with Christianity, right? Christianity is Western based. So we're going to start moving into the role that women played in this, which is really, really interesting. Really, really interesting. All right, let's go to here. All right, let's go ahead and read this. All right. Exploring the evolution of Christian worship reveals profound influences from ancient Greek, Roman, and other Western cultural practices. While Christianity emerged as a direct faith in the 1st century CE, it absorbed aspects of pre-existing religious and philosophical traditions that have shaped modern worship practices. Okay, like we said, number one, ancient Greek and Roman roots of rituals. Sacrifice and offerings. Greek and Roman religious practices often involve sacrificial offerings to appease or communicate with deities, usually at temples dedicated to specific gods. Early Christianity adopted and reinterpreted this concept, replacing material sacrifices with the idea of spiritual devotion, and later the Eucharist, which symbolizes Christ's sacrifice. So like the Eucharist, like, when you think of communion, eat my flesh, drink my blood. We did a video on this where that actually came from. That came from the worship of Dionysus. In the worship of Dionysus, it was literal. In many cases, it was literal, where they actually drank blood and they ate flesh. That was part of their thing. That's where this whole thing came from. All right. And so Christianity absorbed that and said, oh, it's just a dry cracker and some Welch's grape juice. No, that has roots. OK. Another thing, too, about the sacrifice piece, you have, like, let's say Hebrews today, even though they don't practice this, well, I would say they're kind of moving in that direction, though. So keep your eyes on them. Even though they don't practice this today, people who are Hebrews or Hebrew Israelites, they're very big on Old Testament practices, right? When you look at Old Testament practices, one of the ways of worship was offering up sacrifices of a lamb, right? And of other animals, depending on the sin or whatever, right? But mainly it was focused on the lamb, right? And, you're offering up. So that in of itself, that practice did not start with Christianity. This is something that was going on thousands and thousands of years before that, where whatever deity that was being worshiped, they required a sacrifice of animals, right? That's what they did. And then some, depending on, what religion you're talking about, it was a sacrifice of people, All right. Number two, communal worship within hymns. Public worship gatherings in Greek and Roman temples included hymns, prayers, and communal feasting. Practices echoed in early Christian gatherings. The Psalms and other later Christian hymns adopted some of these poetic and musical structures. You can look all through Greek culture and Roman culture and Mesopotamian culture, Babylonian culture, and you'll see that the singing and hymns and psalms and stuff like that, they were doing that way before there was even a thought of a Bible. All right. Patron gods and saints and polytheistic traditions people sought protection from specific gods. Early Christianity adopted this by venerating saints who function in a somewhat similar role to intercede on behalf of worshipers. Okay. Now we're going to get into the woman piece on this. And this is the part that's really interesting. All right. Because now we're getting into the worship lane. All right. The role of women in worship and temple prostitution. In several ancient religious traditions, female temple attendants played significant roles. For example, the Greek temples of Aphrodite and certain Mesopotamian temples had herolduls. Hope I'm saying that, or sacred prostitutes whose sexual acts were seen as a form of devotion, connecting worshipers to the divine. This concept embodied a spiritual view of sexuality and fertility. So I want you to make sure you bookmark that, okay? Because we're going to do a comparison here. So again, now we're not talking Christianity, okay? This is not Christianity. This is what Christianity, Christians in those days, they would say these were pagans, right? And when you look at the definition of pagan, that was a very broad term. But anyway, in this Western mindset, the role of women when it came to worshiping their gods, it involved actual sexual acts. All right. Sex played a very major role in how they would worship their deities. Okay. Sacred prostitution and devotion. While temple prostitution in ancient Greek and Roman contexts was associated with fertility and the honoring of goddesses like Aphrodite or Ishtar, who also known as Esther, like in the book of Esther. And we did a video on that as well, where the book of Esther is really an allegory of Ishtar. Okay, so we've talked about that. We showed you all the receipts on that too. You want to check out that video. Early Christianity took a contrasting stance, emphasizing chastity and reserving sexual intimacy for marriage. Nonetheless, the echoes of the sacred feminine remain subtly influential, and vestiges of these roles appeared in the veneration of female saints and martyrs. All right. Number 3, transition to early Christian worship. Rejection of pagan practices. As Christianity sought to establish itself apart from pagan practices, it redefined worship as a private, moral, and communal experience rather than public, sensual one. The aesthetic, lifestyle of early Christian communities with a focus on chastity, prayer, and moral purity contrasted sharply with the more sensual Greek and Roman worship practices. You see that as Christianity began to advance, they began to try to separate themselves from, those other practices. The role of women in worship. Women had a prominent role in early Christianity, acting as patrons, martyrs, and early church leaders. However, as Christianity became institutionalized within the Roman Empire, these roles diminished and the church enforced stricter rules on the participation and the conduct of women in worship. So they began to start telling women, okay, you need to go sit down somewhere. All right. So let's continue. Syncretic, how you say that? Syncretic, hope I'm saying that right. Fusion with Roman culture. The word basically means when you're taking other cultural influences and you're merging them into one. That's what that word means. Once Christianity gained imperial endorsement under Constantine in the 4th century CE, it began assimilating certain Roman cultural forms. Church structures and rituals adopted aspects of Roman authority, which solidified the hierarchical, I'm saying that right, and formalized style of worship we see today. Shift in worship symbolism, the ceremonial aspects use of incense, candles, vestments were adopted from Roman and Eastern religious practices, adding layers of symbolism that transformed Christian worship into a structured and sensory experience. And that gets in, yeah, we're getting into some stuff there that I've talked about way back. And I'll just leave it up here and we're going to continue to read here. All right. Women were often preferred in temple worship in various ancient cultures, because I want to continue to explore this piece that I just talked about, having women. Why were women so prominent in the temple? Why were they so key in the temple? And when I say temple, I'm talking about the Jewish or the Hebrew temple. I'm talking about the temple, with the Greek and Roman cultures and Mesopotamian cultures. Why were women so prominent in the temple? All right. Women were often preferred in temple worship in various ancient cultures because of the symbolic and cultural associations with femininity, fertility, and the divine feminine, which were thought to create a potent link to the divine. Several interrelated factors contributed to this preference, including, and then they're going to go into it. I'll just say some of it just off the top here. When these cultures, when they look at the woman, many of us even today, the woman is the life giver. She's the one that gives birth. And so a lot of cultures, when they look at the woman, that's what you see. She's, that's what she is. She's a life giver. So when they look at, so a lot of times these cultures, they would look at, nature, and they would see some of these same characteristics. So that's why, when people say Mother Nature, when people look at nature, they oftentimes associate nature with nurture, which women are known for, right? And so that's one of the reasons. Now let's get into the nuts and bolts, okay? Our symbolism of fertility and creation. In many ancient societies, women were seen as bearers of life and connected with the cycles of nature, fertility, and renewal. Temples dedicated to goddesses of fertility, love, and harvest, such as Aphrodite in Greece, Ishtar in Mesopotamia, and Isis in Egypt, often had female temple attendants or priestesses to embody these life-giving qualities. By serving in the temples, women represented the nurturing and sustaining aspects of these goddesses. Their presence was thought to enhance the spiritual and fertile qualities desired by worshipers, aligning the ritual with nature's regenerative forces, like I was just mentioning there. Connection to the divine feminine. Many early societies revered the divine feminine and created temples and rituals centered around goddesses who embodied ideas of love, beauty, wisdom, or war. Women in these roles served as intermediaries, helping worshipers feel closer to these goddesses. For instance, priestesses in ancient Greece served Athena and Demeter, guiding people in spiritual practices related to wisdom, warfare, and agriculture. The next point is this connection to the divine feminine was often seen as a bridge between the mortal world and the spiritual realm. It was believed that the women, as representatives of feminine, or rather female deities, could facilitate communication with the gods and bring blessings to the people. Now, let me stop here for a second here, because as this pertains to the Bible, okay, and what we know as the Bible, and we talk about Hebrew, history and worship. When we look at the Bible, the Bible makes mention of the glory, mentions the Holy Spirit. You hear about that later, right? The Spirit of God. When you start getting more in the Hebrew aspect of it, they may mention the Shekinah, glory, that all of that right there. That all, what it is that when you dive into what the Spirit, what they really represent from a Hebrew standpoint, they see the Spirit of God as the feminine side of him. Okay. That's how they see it. Now, you yourself, you may not look at it that way. What do you mean the feminine side? It's only one God and it's a he. It ain't no she involved in it. Okay, well, that's what you have chosen to believe. But when you look at the architects of the book that you're standing on, they will tell you that the Shekinah, or the Spirit, the Holy Spirit, represents the feminine side of God, or, Yahweh, right? That's what it represents. Asherah. That's what it represents. And so when you see like these priests, not the priests, the rabbis, like in Israel, when they're up there, at the Wailing Wall or whatever, and they're doving, they call it doving. What that is basically they're simulating a sexual act. All right. When they're going back, rocking back and forth, they're actually simulating a sexual act until they reach a high point where there's a release. Okay. We're going to get into that part of it. Okay. We're going to get into that part of it because you're going to see this happen. It comes up over and over again. Okay. So you guys know, those of you who have followed this platform for a minute, we start off very broad and then we bring it to right at your doorstep. Okay. So continue to follow here. Okay. But we have to cover all of this so you get the background as we're moving in on this. Okay. So let's go back and let's continue here. Okay, here we go. Roles in sacred sexuality and ritual purity. In certain ancient cultures, temple prostitution or sacred sexuality was practiced as a way of invoking fertility and divine favor. Female temple attendants or sacred prostitutes would engage in ritual acts intended to honor the gods and ensure prosperity, fertility, and societal well-being. These rituals found in Mesopotamian and Canaanite practices were thought to create a sacred union that symbolically merged the earthly and divine. In addition to sacred sexuality, women were often seen as pure or set apart, symbolizing qualities of the deity that they served. So, when you hear like the church is a woman, the bride of Christ, that kind of thing, these are not new concepts. Christianity didn't bring these concepts. Your Bible didn't just bring these concepts on their own. This was something that was already being practiced thousands of years before there was even a Bible. Okay. This is why when you read in the Bible and the church or Israel is described as a woman, where did they get that whole concept from? Mesopotamian, Canaanite practices. They already have been doing that. All right. Temple rituals often emphasize purity, with female priestesses engaging in cleansing and purity rites to ensure their spiritual readiness, which in turn made them ideal vessels for facilitating divine experiences. So when you read in the Bible about the priests and all the stuff that they have to go through and purifying themselves, what these priests were representing was a woman and how she has to prepare herself for her groom. That's what they were really representing. Anyway, y'all better be listening. Anyway, let's move on. Cultural norms and social roles. I think this is the part that stuck out to me too. Gender roles in ancient societies were often rigid, with women occupying specific societal niches that lent themselves to certain religious roles. Since men were typically engaged in public or military affairs, women's roles within religious settings could offer them a place of influence within temple hierarchies. This is very important. Oh my goodness, this is very important. Because we see this happening today. We see this happening in the church today. So way this was kind of laying the groundwork for Christianity. Men were the ones, we were out there doing war. We were building buildings. We were planting gardens. We were doing all the man work, right? Well, that, for women, it was pretty much stay at home, have children, raise the children, cook the food, and be ready for me at night, baby. That kind of thing. That's kind of what the role of the woman was in those societies, in those early ancient societies. That's how it was. But what it did was it left a door of opportunity open for women to really see themselves when you start getting into religious practices and spirituality in their religion. Women found their place in that. You know what I'm saying? And that's why you saw the women all in the temple. You see the women in there worshiping to the point where they, engaged in prostitution and all that. That was all part of worship. And so that's why in the temple, in these cultures, women were very prominent. That's why you see them there. All right. This other point, and they bring it home. They say the priestess role allowed women to a form of public agency and spiritual authority otherwise unavailable to them in many ancient societies. By becoming dedicated attendants of a deity, women could achieve respect, status, and at times power within their communities. Okay. Number 5, it says mystique of womanhood and spiritual sensitivity. Women were often believed to possess natural intuitive abilities or a closer connection to the mystical and spiritual, making them especially valuable in temple worship. This notion that women could access certain knowledge or states of being more easily than men helped shape their roles in temples as oracles, prophetesses, and priestesses. Priestesses. So this is why the women, and we see this happening today. We see this happening today. You go on YouTube, how many prophetesses you see here on YouTube? Where did they get that from? They got this from ancient Greek and Roman culture. All right. All right. For example, the Oracle of Delphi in Greece, the Oracle of Delphi, isn't that? I think that has something to do with the AKAs. If I'm not mistaken, it's either AKAs or deltas. Anyway, in Greece was a woman who was thought to be the mouthpiece of the god Apollo, providing guidance and prophecies that were highly influential in Greek culture. All right, so there you go. So let's move on here. So what I did then, I said, okay, let's take a look. Let's do a comparison between ancient this Western culture and how they perceive the woman in worship versus ancient African culture, excluding Egypt. Now, the reason why I excluded Egypt in that, not that Egypt isn't important, because it is, but anything you bring up about ancient Egyptian culture, you do have to put an asterisk by it, because ancient Egyptian culture, unfortunately, was heavily influenced by Western influences. You understand what I'm saying? It's not to say that there was no Africans at all. I'm not getting in all of that. I'm not saying it, but they were heavily influenced by a lot of what Europeans, the Greeks and the Romans and all that came through there. They were heavily influenced. So you got to take, it takes a little bit more time to sort through their stuff. You know what I mean? So that's why I said I'm just excluding that, and I was more focused on everywhere else on the continent. And yes, there are other countries on the continent than Egypt. Okay, Egypt ain't the only country. Okay, a lot of times when people talk about ancient African culture, they just center 100% on Egypt, like that was the only thing. You had Congo, the Kingdom of Congo. You had kingdoms on the Nok Kingdom, that's on the west coast of Africa. I mean, you had some ancient cultures all throughout the continent, but everybody wants to focus on Egypt. But anyway, let's go. And these other cultures that I mentioned, like the Nok culture, NOK, they preceded Egypt by thousands of years, or the Kingdom of Congo. I mean, some of these other kingdoms, there's a kingdom down in South Africa that was, what was it, up to 60, 70,000 years. Anyway, let's move on. Let's see here. Okay. So the worship practices and spiritual beliefs of ancient Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian cultures contrast significantly with traditional African spirituality outside of Egypt, particularly regarding communal values, cosmology, and the role of women. Here is a comparative look at these systems. Number 1, nature of deities and worship practices. Okay, now in Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian cultures, these cultures had polytheistic systems with deities that personify specific aspects of life, such as love, war, wisdom, or harvest. These gods often had human-like personalities and relationships, as well as temples and dedicated cults. Now, when we look at, okay, let me continue. Worship was highly structured, often centered on formal temples and rituals. Sacrifices, animal, grain, or wine, and festivals were important for appeasing and communicating with these deities. And elaborate state-sponsored festivals and public temples were common. Now, when we look at African spirituality, You have traditional African spirituality. It's also predominantly polytheistic, but differs in its more integrated, holistic approach, where spiritual practices are interwoven with daily life. Deities are often associated with natural elements like rivers, mountains, animals, and ancestors. Okay, so there's definitely a more, like they say, holistic, a natural approach to, in African spirituality. Again, we're looking at African spirituality in a very broad general sense. Okay. Where am I hate when you do that. You touch something and it just goes all over the place. Okay. Okay, here we go. And then African spirituality, here's the other point. Rather than centralized temples, worship often occurs in natural settings or in the home, with communal gatherings and celebrations reinforcing the connection between people and the spirit world. Ancestor veneration is central, as ancestors are seen as protective, guiding spirits who continue to influence the living. So it wasn't this structured, like we have this whole temple that's dedicated to this and this temple dedicated to that. African spirituality was a lot more fluid. It was all in creation. It was all in your water. It was in your food. It was this and everything, where it was very rigid when you look at, worship in Western cultures. Number two, communal versus hierarchical structure of worship. Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian cultures. All right, it says worship was hierarchical. I'm saying that right. Often led by a specialized priesthood with rigid social and gender roles. Temples were monumental, serving as centers of state-sanctioned rituals and as symbols of political power. That's why you got these mega churches today. Where did they get that idea from? They got that from the Greeks and the Romans. That's where they got that from. We're going to have a building program because we need this big building to let everybody know that our God is a big God and all of that. Where they get that from? It was the Greek and the Romans and Mesopotamians. That's who was building this stuff. All right. And then the second point, it says priests and priestesses were appointed and held significant influence, but operated within strict social and gender confines, with male priests usually occupying the highest ranks. Like in the black church, you got the preacher. He's always at the highest rank. And then under him, he got all the women. Okay. Now let's go to African spirituality. Let's look at the contrast with African spirituality. African spiritual practices are typical, communal, and decentralized. Rather than a strict clergy, communities may have spiritual leaders such as shamans, diviners, or elders chosen by experience or spiritual calling. Worship practices and rituals involve the entire community, blurring lines between religious and social roles. Spirituality permeates all aspects of life. So women and men alike participate in religious rites, especially those tied to life events, seasons, or agricultural cycles. Okay. Let's move on to the next one. I don't know about you, this is really fascinating. The role of women in worship. In Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian cultures, women held distinct but limited roles in the priesthood, often restricted to specific cults, particularly for goddesses like Athena, Demeter, and Aphrodite, Vesta, and Inanna, Mesopotamia. Certain goddesses, temples like that of Aphrodite and Inanna, involve roles for women as temple attendants or sacred prostitutes, serving as intermediaries between worshipers and the divine. Female priestesses held some social power, but were expected to adhere to societal norms. They were often confined to ceremonial, ritualistic roles and did not generally wield social or political influence outside of these contexts. So again, the woman, she was seen as, your domain is going to be in the church. Okay, it's going to be in the temple. That's your domain. But once you step out of there, you just going to be like, you're going to fall back. You're going to fall all the way back. But as long as you're in the church, you got reign here. Okay, this theme, I'm telling you, we see it today, don't we? All right, now let's do a comparison to African spirituality. In African traditions, women frequently hold significant and active roles in spirituality as priestesses, diviners, and healers, sometimes even wielding political influence through spiritual authority. Unlike in Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian societies, African women's roles in worship often extend beyond the temple or shrine and into community leadership. You kind of see this in Black culture today to a certain extent. Women are seen as essential figures in nurturing and sustaining spiritual practices within the community. And the fluid nature of spiritual leadership allows women to act as mediators, healers, and custodians of cultural knowledge. Matriarchal spiritual roles are more common, especially in West African cultures where female-led secret societies, they said the Sandi society and the Mende culture, maintain ritual authority and cultural education. All right. So the women played it went beyond just these little small groups. The picture that we're seeing is that how women oftentimes they led in this. It was accepted for them to be leaders within their religion. I'm talking about African spirituality. And it went beyond just these little like, okay, woman, you stay home and you do this. But women were actually seen as leaders on the same footing as men in many of these African cultures. You'll see that. I mean, you got like the woman king, for example. There are examples throughout African culture when you look at some of these other countries where that was pretty common. And, where women, sometimes they did play in the role of men. And, for me personally, I can't go for that. You know what I'm saying? But I just wanted to show you the contrast, right? Let me see here. Okay, perspective on afterlife and ancestral worship. Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian cultures, the afterlife was generally viewed as a distant, often dreary realm. This is how Greek and Romans and Mesopotamians, this is how they view the afterlife. The Greeks imagined a bleak underworld ruled by Hades, while Romans and Mesopotamians had similar views of an underworld where the spirits existed in a shadowy form with little interaction between the living and the dead. While some deities of the underworld were worshipped, active ancestral veneration was not central to these religious practices. So this whole concept that we have of hell, that, the bad people go down below and they're eternally cut off from everybody else. Again, that is a belief system that came out of Western culture. It came out of Western religion, Christianity. That's all of that came from the same pot. All right. The second point, while some deities of the underworld were worshipped, active ancestral veneration was not central to these religious practices. Now, let's contrast that with African spirituality. African spirituality is deeply rooted in ancestor veneration, with the belief that these spirits of the deceased remain actively involved in the lives of their descendants. The ancestors are guardians who can intercede, advise, and protect, and they are honored in rituals, prayers, and offerings. The relationship with ancestors emphasizes a continuous cycle view, I'll just say that, of life and death, where the living and the dead are interconnected, fostering a sense of kinship and continuity that contrasts with the Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian concepts of distant afterlife. So, yeah, as you're seeing is that there's some stark differences between the two. Now, again, I'm not promoting anyone, okay, either side. I'm not saying this is why we got to go back to African spirituality. I'm not saying that at all. We're just studying. We're just looking. And I'm showing you the contrast between the two. And we're looking at the same time. I want the other side of your brain to be thinking about the church as we know it today. And what practices do you see in the churches today? What are the practices you see now? Is it coming out of African spirituality or is it coming out of the Western culture? I would say that it's heavily influenced, again, by Western culture. This is why I started the way I did. We're going to look at Christianity. We're going to understand worship. We got to look at it through the lens of Western culture. All right. One last thing, let's get to it. Integration of spirituality with daily life. Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian cultures, worship practices were often confined to designated times and places such as temples and public festivals. Religion was a distant sphere. While it influenced politics, it was separate from daily personal life in many respects. Religion was also heavily tied to the state, such as, let me say back up. I don't want to read that too fast. Religion was also heavily tied to the state, 501c3. All right. And as such, it was an institution with codified rules, regulation, and centralized oversight. Let's look at African spirituality. In traditional African societies, spirituality is inseparable from daily life, influencing family, structure, community relations, health, agriculture, and governance. Rituals and spiritual practices are often practiced informally within the community or family and are part of everyday actions and decisions. And then the other point, the lack of separation between sacred and secular life allows spirituality to permeate all aspects of existence, making religious practices more personal and community-centered rather than state-controlled. So again, when we think about religion, when we think about Christianity, the church and how the church functions, now you're starting to see, this is why I wanted to go through all this and and you're going to see how all of that is connected to worship. It's rooted in Western culture, and you're seeing the contrast between the two. Now, again, I'm not advocating, and I have to keep saying this because some people, they get certain things locked in their mind and that's it. I'm not advocating a return to African spirituality, but what we must point out is African spirituality, you can see how it just naturally flowed with the people. There was no like this rigid kind of stuff that we see in Western culture. And in Western culture, it's this, we gotta manipulate the people to believe and to embrace, what we're about and all this stuff. So we're gonna do manipulation. We're gonna use music. We're gonna use plays and skits, and we're gonna get people to the point of crying and feeling a sense of fear and agony and pain and all this other stuff. Versus African spirituality was totally opposite of that. It wasn't centered on any of that. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it's quite fascinating. All right, let's move on. And what's my next point here? Give me just a moment here. How does Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian forms of worship compare? Okay, I did that. Do we see sexual acts with women playing a pivotal role in African spirituality? I think I already answered that. No, you don't. The question again, this is on my notes. Do we see sexual acts with women playing a pivotal role in African spirituality? No, you don't. I mean, not to the degree that you're seeing in Western culture. Not when you look at Greek, Roman, and Mesopotamian practices where we pointed out how sexuality was the key, to worship. In African spirituality, although it's mentioned, and there are some cases where sexuality, the act, is included, by and large, sexuality, the act of it, was somewhat excluded from worship. That was seen as, it wasn't just centered on that. There was an understanding of the woman, and she's the mother, the giver of life, and all that other stuff. But there wasn't any, you don't see in African spirituality that, okay, we got a bunch of women here, you're going to have sex with them, and so that you can better connect with the gods and goddesses of African spirituality. You don't see that as often as you do when you're looking at Western culture. All right. So I wanted to point that out because I have a whole reading on that, but I'm just going to change the pace on there. But I'm just kind of wanting to tie that up real quick. Okay. So now, well, we did a lot of history. Now we're going to speed all the way up, and now we're going to go to modern history. Okay. Okay. So we talked about how the role of women and the role that women played in worship within Western culture. All right. Now we're going to look at, and you remember earlier we talked about catharsis, all right, and what catharsis was, right, and how it's basically a way to manipulate people. And in catharsis, it talked about the importance of having the chorus, which represented the people. And oftentimes the chorus, they would, if you've ever seen an ancient Greek play, like, people like redo them, sometimes they're singing, sometimes they're like chanting and all of that, but they represent the people. And it was a way to, again, I've already explained that. So music was one of the tools that was used to manipulate the crowd, to get the people to work them to this place where they were, at this height of ecstasy. All right. Now, this is the part where we're going to, making sure that the adults only are in the room. OK, I'm going to say it. I'm going to explain this part kind of as just straight as possible. But, again, the adults will get it. When you do a side-by-side comparison between how worship works within the Western concept versus the stages of intercourse, you're going to see some startling parallels between the two. Startling parallels. I would say what will be a good place to start here with this conversation. All right. So let me go to this video here. Many of you seen this. This is a pastor that was at a conference, and he's training other preachers on how to whoop, how they whoop in the church. And I want you to take a listen to him, and then we're going to get into some other aspects of music. Okay. And let me pull this up here, and let's go ahead and play this video. Take a listen.
So-and-so, 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 so-and-so. And you're ready to hoop now. But you've been going up, 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 until hoop time, you ain't got nowhere else to go. So you start straining. All right, now no reflection. Now EV is a master at his own art in his own way. But if you notice EV is so, hallelujah, so, praise his name, so. Well, see, EV can't go up no further. All right, because he's not a naturally gifted preacher. Now, what I detected about myself was when I go up, 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 that what I had to do was talk my way back down. So when time to hoop, I said, and so the Lord said, so-and-so, so-and-so, and he went on, and you see, and he came on down to where the Lord said, and I will go on down, my brother and my sister. And so-and-so, so-and-so, I'm where I want to be, see, because I found my key. All right, now what does this mean since I found where my tune is most comfortable at? It means simply this, that if I'm at the key where I want it and I'm tuning good because I'm relaxed down here, it means that if I can't go nowhere else, I can at least go back to where I was, because I was there. And anywhere you were, you can go back to it. All right, so since I'm down here now, and the Lord says so-and-so, 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 back to where I was. And 9.9 of the time, because I went down and got the tune, I can go high. See? So in essence, what I'm telling you is this, that when you Go up to the body of your sermon if you're a kind of person that can't shift and not naturally gifted, and maybe some of us who are gifted, it may help the gift to even be more so. What you do is go up to that point, all the loud and hard, and drive all you want. But when time to tune, talk your way back down to where you're comfortable. Level off there. And when time to holler, you know you're going with ease. Go back to where you were. And because you relaxed, more than likely, you can carry it higher. Ain't nothing else I can tell y'all.
Now, when you listen to him now keep in mind what we were just talking about, how, in Western, culture, when it comes to their religion, the role that sex played in that. It was very instrumental in it. Now, when you listen to him now, what do you hear? You hear it's intercourse. This man is actually describing intercourse. All right. And you're going to see as we continue with this is what worship really is. This is what it's really pulling out of people. At least it's trying to pull out of people. All right. Again, it's catharsis. All right. You're getting people in a state of catharsis where you're getting them to this place where they are just so enraptured and feel this sense of, like they just gotta purge themselves and just give themselves over to, I'm just stripping all my stuff off. In the Bible, it talks about how, when the people felt bad or whatever, when they're in state of repentance, they would rip all their clothes off and then just lay on the ground or whatever, that kind of thing. That's what this is talking about. And this is all tied to the Greek tragedy and all that stuff, right? So that's what he's describing. Let me go to, just a moment here. Okay, so many of you have heard of, excuse me, you've heard of the term Beatlemania, right? Beatlemania. And Beatlemania is basically, it's not really deep, but, just follow along with this. What they noticed was that the Beatles, when they would do, I want to hold your hand. They do that. And they said when they would do that, the girls would just lose it. They would scream. When they would hit that high pitched noise, the girls would just completely lose it. Well, you've had people over the years that actually studied that. And they noticed something, that they're noticing that there was a correlation between when people would hit that certain note and the impact it would have on women. Which I thought this was, and I've heard this before, and it wasn't until I really looked into it. And it's really something. So let me but let me just say this too. It didn't start with the Beatles. Let's just be very clear with that. Let's be extremely clear with that. That didn't start with the Beatles. No, sir. That started, you had black people who were doing that. The Beatles were the ones that were looking at black musicians, because black musicians were singing like this and incorporating that in music on the Chitlin circuit for years. And it was white people that saw that and saw the reaction when black singers, when they would sing that, it hit that high pitched note, or when they would sing in falsetto, they saw the reaction that would happen in the crowd with the women. You remember in the movie The Five Heartbeats, when that girl is light-skinned girl, they singing, and then the girl, she just completely lost it. Well, that's what they were pulling from. That's our history. When there was this understanding that you hit them certain notes, man, them girls will just lose it. Well, it's a scientific thing tied to that. But one of the major players in that back in the day was Little Richard. And in this article that was in Vibe magazine, yeah, that's him, Little Richard. That boy boy, he was a piece of work. This article was written back in 2020. I highlighted this particular piece that I thought was really interesting here. It's right here. I want you to listen in on this part. He says you could take his singing voice, for example, and trace the sound back to the plantation slave field holler, through the blues, spirituals, and gospel to urban sounds like R&B and jazz, all culminating in his signature shriek, a profoundly liberating influence on modern pop music. His scream can be heard in the work of performers as diverse as J.B., I'm assuming they're talking about James Brown, Paul McCartney, Janis Joplin, the Glyph, who was once a slave to the evil Time Warner Empire, even in the orgasmic guitar screech of Jimi Hendrix, who used to play in Richard's band. Little Richard's scream is the expression of primal emotions with the power to drive crowds in a Dionysian frenzy. Did I tell you earlier in this video, did I not say, remember this, because it's going to come back? With the power to drive crowds in a Dionysian frenzy. His voice is the true voice of America. He sings for all of us. So when he would hit that note, boy, it was something else, wasn't it? It was something else. Particularly these women, they would lose their minds. Now, if you saw men losing their minds too, then, they were, along the lines of what Little Richard was. In fact, let me play the audio, because I don't know if I can play the video, but let me just listen into the audio of this. This is the origins of the song Tutti Frutti. I want you to listen in to this audio. It's like a minute and 42 seconds. Listen in.
When we went into the Dewdrop Inn, there was a piano, all of the boosters, rounders, pimps, whores, and everything else was hanging around. And that was when I began to know and understand Richard. Because that's all you got to do is give Richard an audience, turn the lights on, and the show is on.
And Richard jumped on the piano and did a wah ba ba loo ba ba la bam bam. So they heard and said, wait a minute, what's that? It was a hook that they had never heard before. But Richard had been singing that phrase for years, on the chitlin circuit.
And so I started singing. Wah ba blue ba blah bam boom. If it don't fit, don't force it. You can grease it and make it easy. If you want it, you got it. Tutti frutti, good booty.
The lyrics could be interpreted as gay sex. They're not gonna play that on the radio. Tutti frutti, good booty. And everybody knew this ain't about ice cream. But the primary reaction from the producer's point of view was that, hey, this sounds like a hit record.
I asked him, did he have a grudge against making money? He said, no. I said, good.
They said it was smutty, and so they helped me clean up my own lyrics. It was my song. I bought the song there.
Yeah, so we wrote the words Tutti Frutti All Rooty, and a girl named Sue and a girl named Daisy. Put Richard on the piano, and in 15 minutes, I think we cut 2 or 3 cuts, and it's been history ever since.
I mean, they're telling you, so that's just a little like extra there that I just gave you as far as like the, behind the song Tutti Frutti. Yeah, it was about that. But anyway, but that was just a little extra. Okay. But the whole hit, the sound, the pitch of the sound and the impact on women. Now let's get into that. Okay. Because and I'm gonna make reference to several people who've looked into this, and you can look in this on your own. Okay. So anyway, let me read this. It says, yes, there is a documented connection between the Beatles' vocal style, including their high-pitched screams and energetic performances, and the intense emotional and psychological reactions of their fans, particularly young women. This phenomenon, often described as Beatlemania, saw fans, especially female fans, responding with overwhelming excitement, and it was partly driven by the Beatles' musical techniques, including their vocalizations, lyrics, on-stage charisma. Here's how the elements contributed to their connection. Let me see here. high-pitched vocals and emotional intensity. I'm just going to skip over some of this here, and because there's another part here that I want to get to. Research on vocal processing suggests that high-pitched and loud sounds can induce strong emotional reactions as they are linked to excitement and urgency. The element of excitement was intensified in live performances where the combination of music, screaming, and stage presence created a thrilling atmosphere for fans. Let's see. I'll just go here. I'm going to jump here because I have another one here. In psychological terms, this excitement is related to emotional contagion, where once one person's heightened emotional state influences others. In a large concert setting, just think of a church as well, this effect can be multiplied, leading to a frenzy where fans scream, cry, and express extreme excitement. Neurologically, this type of arousal response activates dopamine pathways in the brain associated with pleasure and reward, which is why fans reported a feeling of a rush from seeing or hearing the Beatles. All right. Now here's some studies that was done on this that went in a little bit further in this. This was Mr. Huron. Name of this his study was Sweet Anticipation, Music and the Psychology of Expectation. Huron's work explores how musical elements like pitch and rhythm create emotional responses in listeners, including heightened arousal. This book provides a deep dive into how elements such as high-pitched vocals and sudden changes in dynamics can provoke strong emotional reactions. This is another source here. Satori and AJ Blood. Intensely pleasurable responses to music correlates with activity in the brain regions implicated in reward and emotion. This study links to pleasure with dopamine release, explaining why intense vocal music like high pitch or energetic singing can trigger an arousal response similar to what fans may have felt during live performances. This is another source. This is P.N. Jocelyn and P. Lauka. Hope I'm saying that right. Similar patterns of age-related differences in emotional recognition for voices and music. This research covers emotional arousal potential of vocal tones, including high pitches and how different types of vocals, screaming and shouting, can evoke strong responses in listeners across age groups. And then they talk about contagion. This is another source here. They just go on and on and on, and they mention how what it did was it sparked arousal, particularly in females. And once you get one person screaming and shouting, others would follow likewise. That's the whole contagion aspect of it. But also it was a sense of release. It was like you were just releasing something. Remember, also during that time, when the Beatles came out, it was a cultural clash because during that time, people like things structured and ordered and all of that. And, you just clap your hands and you just sit orderly or whatever. But when the Beatles came, and again, this is the Beatles, we already know in black culture, that's had been going on for years and years and years. But I'm just speaking in the wider culture, American or Western culture, when the Beatles came up, right? It just broke all those norms. And this generation that had been trained to be traditionally like, hold it down, there's order and all that. The Beatles just blew that out the water. And so the screaming was a way of releasing, right? That's what it was. And so again, this ties back into what we were talking about earlier, what worship basically is. It's an act of releasing. It's like that preacher, he was saying, like, okay, you got to work them up a little bit and then you bring it back down and then you work it back up, just the whole manipulation. He's describing a sexual act. That's what he's doing. Intercourse. That's what he's describing. He's literally describing this. And you got people in concerts, musicians been doing this for years. Okay. But wait, there's more to this. Okay. Let me get to, I played the music. Okay, so I played the video. Okay, 2 more points and we're done here. Okay, why straight men tend not to be worshipers. Okay, so now you got an understanding of now we're getting a clearer picture of what worship is. When you let me play this. Sorry, let me play this. I just remembered that this is a short clip here. This is a short clip. I remember years ago seeing Tremaine Hawkins. We were at what's the name of the church? It was whatever the name of the church is at the Forum in LA. I forgot the name of the church, but it was Easter, and we went to church there, and they had Tremaine Hawkins performing there, and she was singing Change. And, you know, for those of you familiar with that song, you know, there's that one part where that woman is screaming. Well, honey, let me tell you something. That woman, when we sat there and we watched, it was so loud. I couldn't take it. I had to leave. Our children were small. I said, honey, I'm sorry. If you want to stay and you want to watch it, it's fine, but I'm getting up out of here. I can't take it. It was just too much. And this is her here, in case you're not familiar with. This is Tremaine Hawkins here. Let me play this here. Her singing it. I'll just play a little bit of it. So all of that. So yeah, I don't think I'm gonna get any copyright on that. But this is what you see in the church today. All right. This whole thing of getting people into this place of, let me go back. Let me pull this up again so that we're all, so y'all following along here. Let me go back here. All right. We're actually almost finished here. Let me go back. Let me get it up here for you again. Hold on. Let's see. Hold on. Hey, is it all the way at the end? Hold on for a second. Where am I? Oh, here. Is this it? And I got some. Anyway, let me see here. Okay, I think this is it. Okay, all right, here we go. All right, let me just bring this back up here again. We'll just go through this again, just to make sure that we're on the same page. So the concept of catharsis has parallels with Christian worship. And basically, and we went through that again with catharsis, what it actually is. It's right here. This is the concept in psychology and the art, referring to the process of releasing and thereby providing relief from strong or repressed emotions. The term originates from the Greek word catharsis with the K, meaning cleansing or purging. So when people are out here screaming, I did the whole demonstration earlier. Oh God, yeah, Lord, I praise you, I give you the glory, hallelujah. You're trying to get people, you're commanding people to reach deep and find whatever it is that you've been dealing with and just release it, go release it. So when you go into church, for example, they start you off slow, like that preacher, like he was saying, hey, how you doing? They play some friendly music or whatever. Then they switch into, okay, now come into the bedroom. It's literally, when you think about this now, this is how it's laid out. This is how church is laid out. They welcome you in to watch Netflix, right? And, but they're going to get you to the chill part a little bit later, right? So they invite you in and, oh, come on. I was glad when they said unto me, let us go into the house of the Lord. So you're like, hey, all right, I'm coming over to the apartment. So you're coming on in, right? You're in the house. All right, have your seat. All right, sit down. Yeah, all right. Who's our first time visitors? Okay, we're going to make you nice and comfortable, right? Okay, we're going to make you nice and comfortable. Then what do? Now, all of a sudden, because now you got churches out there now, when they get to a certain part of they go from praise, then they go to worship. Oh, they get to the worship part. And in churches now, they turn the lights down. You got churches now, when you get to the worship part, It's the time to turn down the lights. Have you thought of this? I'm telling you now, I sat up there, I was like, oh my goodness, this is literally what they've been doing. So they turn down the lights to get into worship. And then they get you in the mood, and then they just, let's just worship him. You know, there's some churches that say, just open your mouth and just make love to Jesus. I've heard this. Just make love to him. Just do it. Just make love to him. And they're telling people in a crowd that's made up of women, men, straight men, and children. You're telling them to make love to Jesus? What? Yes. So you got the lights down low, and then they like, you're getting them into this state of catharsis. Just go, all right now. All right. Okay. All right. Then you got to start bringing in the part that, all right now, this man, he died for you. He was beaten. He was wounded for your transgressions. He did all this stuff for you and all this stuff. And then it gets you into the state of, I thought I was having a bad week. Shoot, I'm thinking about this man who came down off from heaven, and he came to cry. He came to die for me. Oh, he came from heaven to earth and you did all worked up. And all of a sudden now, whatever your problems were, now, all of a sudden, you're kind of leaving those behind to embrace this protagonist, right? And his struggles that they're telling you he was struggling for you. So you're pushed into this alternate state of having to embrace this person who bled and died for you. You understand what I'm saying? And so they got the music, and then they working you up and working you up and working you up. And then you get to this frenzy to the certain point where all of a sudden they just let it out. Oh, baby, just let it all out. Yeah, this is what praise and worship is. This is what it is. Now, here's the part that's really makes you really think. A lot of these praise and worship leaders are women. So you got women who are leading other women to an orgasmic state. And you wonder why there's so many women in the church. And you wonder why, in most cases, if you want to know where all the homosexual men are, they're in the church. Because you have a woman leading them into the bedroom and getting them up to a state, an orgasmic state in worship. And then you just bring them all down, and then you just move about the whole service where the indoctrination takes place. Now, a straight man going into that situation, they already see from a mile away. They're like, wait a minute, this is kind of weird. Why I gotta go through all this where I'm just like, oh Lord, oh. You're telling me the key to really understanding something, I gotta come in like this. I surrender. Whatever you do, I just surrender. I give up everything. Anything and all that I have, I just give it all up. I just give it up. Everything about me, I just give it up. I'm nothing. I'm just dirt. I'm garbage. I am just trash. I'm spit. I'm just absolutely nothing. Like, you got to defame yourself. You got to beat yourself up so that this God can be glorified. Huh? I thought you were a son. I thought you were a daughter. Huh? I mean, when you read the Bible itself, it talks about how the prodigal son, how he was welcomed back. The prodigal son, when he was welcomed back, how was he welcomed back? He tried to come in that way. And the father was like, oh, hold up. No. I don't care. You are my son. Get him a robe, get him a ring, get him this and that or whatever. This is my son. I don't care what he did. But In church, we're taught that no, you don't come in that way. You got to come in this way. You got to come in as, oh, I'm nothing. I'm trash. I'm dirt. I'm just nothing. I'm just a bridge that need to be walked on. Oh, I'm nothing. But you are the one. You are the one. Let me tell you something. No straight man thinks that way. And they're not going to go along with that. They're not. I'm not. You understand what I'm saying? I'm certainly not. That's not appealing to me. See, men, straight men, what do? We defend, we protect, right? We build, we uplift, right? These are things that we do, right? We don't go into a situation. If I'm going to talk to other men, I'm not going to talk to other men and saying that, oh, I'm just absolutely nothing. I'm just a piece of dirt. I'm just a piece of crap. Oh, Lord Jesus, I ain't that. No, I'm nothing. No. A straight man don't think that way. That's bending over. That's exactly what that is. You are bending over in worship. That's exactly what you are doing. You are literally bending over to receive. That's what you're doing. No straight man is going to do that. Do you understand what I'm saying? I got to debase myself in order to feel some sense of worthiness. So you got the women over here that's got to be brought to a point of arousal, and then they release with all the screaming and hollering and crying on one side of the house. And then you got on the other side, you got the men bowed down in worship, receiving. What do you think that's going to produce? All of this comes from these cultures that I just mentioned. That's what it comes from. Do you remember? And I almost forgot. I'm glad I remembered. If I could play the scene, I sure would. But I would encourage you to go back. Many of you who are familiar with the Color Purple, the scene in The Color Purple, because this gives you an idea of who exactly is the people who are really controlling the church. And again, this flashes back to what we were talking about in those temples in Greek and Roman culture, that it's the women that really were controlling these temples. You know what I mean? This was their space of control and of great influence. You see this in the movie Color Purple. Now, do you remember? Now, I ain't talking about the new one. I haven't seen it. I ain't trying to see it. But do you remember this scene in The Color Purple, the original one, right? Here you had Suge Avery. She was the one that was like the singer and singing in the juke joints and all that other stuff, right? And she's out there. It was a Sunday, and they're all out there. They're singing and all that. Sister, you've been on my, all of that, right? So she's singing that song, and while she's singing the song, out at a distance down the country road, she hears two things. She hears the choir in this church singing, and she hears the preacher, who was her father, preaching. And so she's singing and all that, and then she gets to this point where she's like, I can't do this anymore. And so she does this whole thing where she goes back to the church, and while she's coming back to the church, she's coming to the church and she's singing, right? And here the preacher, who's her father, he's in the middle of a sermon. Now this dude he's like in his zone. I mean, he is preaching. You hear what I'm saying? This man is preaching. And so you don't disturb someone who's preaching. When you're in a traditional black church, you don't disturb them, okay? Unless you up there saying, amen, or, preach it, brother, unless you saying stuff like that. But you don't disturb them. Do you understand what I'm saying? You don't do that. But in this scene, what did we see? It was the women in the congregation. They were like, tell him to play. They need to sing God's trying to tell you something. Tell them to sing that God's trying to tell you something. And they kept saying that in the crowd. And finally, this preacher stopped and he turned around. He was like, y'all sing, yes, y'all need to get up and sing God trying to tell you something. Do you see how much control they had in this church? This is what you see happening today in these churches. And this is why I said, hey, listen, we need to be honest with ourselves when we talk about, specifically when we're talking about the black church, and that the black church is in fact a women's organization, because it is. When you look at it historically, you see now, we spent almost 2 hours. We had to go through all that so you can see where it actually comes from. This is why you're not going to see men in this. Men ain't going, there's no straight man that I know of that's going to wake up on Sunday morning and say, I can't wait to go to church so that I can bow down and receive. There's no straight man that I know is going to do that, where I can sit up there and cry and scream and say how I'm not worthy and all that other stuff. Men don't think that. You know what men, a lot of men, not all, but a lot of men thinking about on Sundays, they're thinking about football. They're thinking about watching competition. They're thinking about the aggressiveness. They're thinking about all that stuff. They're thinking about competition. And I know I just said that, but I'm just saying it again. It's just all of that comes with watching football. Now, again, that's not all men are in football, but you get my point. There's no straight man that's thinking about, I can't wait to go to church so I can just fall out and cry. We're protectors. We're builders. We're providers. You understand what I'm saying? This is what we do. We love our women. We love our children. We do these things. We're not throwing our hands up in surrender. A real man a man ain't surrendering to nobody. A true man is going to stand and fight until his last breath. That's what a true man is going to do. A true man and a true father ain't going to raise his children to raise your hands up. I ain't training my son to do that. I'm gonna say, bro, you better fight until your last. No, you ain't raising your hands up to nobody. I don't care who they are. You don't raise your hands up. No, you fight. But in the religious sense, no, when you come in here, you got to give up. Just give it all up. Just give it all up. Bow down and receive. And the last but not least, I'll just bring this out, the connection to slavery. You remember that scene? It was in this, I don't even know the name of the movie. Some of y'all have seen this, but you've seen these movies. You've seen this one movie. It's Shirley Temple. And she up there tap dancing with the guy who's like the slave, the house Negro. And they up there tap dancing, going up down the steps. And, people back then, they were looking at that like, oh, they're so sweet. Look at that or whatever. Now, remember that the time period that this movie was set in, he tap dancing, but outside his people are getting the heck beaten out of him. But he's in the house tap dancing. Or you've seen, where, some of the slaves, the house Negroes, they like, hey, boss, whatever you say, hey, whatever you say. These are grown men. These are grown men that are up here saying, yeah, boss, whatever you want to do, I'll be here for you. All that stuff, right? Well, what got them to that point? See, what I just described to you with men and who we are and how we've been created, that's who we are by nature. But see, when they went and got us and brought us into slavery, they understood that there was the only way we can break this down is that we got to do one of two things. We're going to have to beat them, and keep beating them until they ain't got no energy but to say yes to us. And if that don't work, then we got to buck break them. We got to get them to bow down and to worship us and receive. That was how they broke these men down, because no natural man is up here like, yeah, whatever you say. No natural man is thinking that way. No natural man operates like that unless they've been buck broken. And no woman wants a man like that. You understand what I'm saying? So this is why we don't see, the straight men that we're really talking about here. You're not going to see them in the church because you're trying to get them, you're treating them like women. And it's done so by design because the temples were mainly the place where women ran the stuff. Women used their sexuality as a way to arouse, to create arousal, and out of that arousal came the worship to whatever deities that they're worshiping. And where did they get that from? From Greek, Roman, Mesopotamian culture. That's where it comes from. So this is why today you can't get men in the church. You can't, not straight men, you can't, but you can sure get a lot of gay men up in there. You can get a lot of lesbians up in there because that's exactly what it's designed for. And it goes all the way back to history. And that's why we had to spend all this time to go through that part. So anyway, I think that's it. I think we covered just about everything I need to cover here for that. So take your time, go through this. Maybe you need to go through it again. And what I'll do is the quick notes that I have, I'm just gonna copy and paste it, put it in the in the description of this video, and then you can just follow along with that. And really, that's it. I got an audio recording of this too. So if you want an audio recording of this, I can provide that for you because I don't really know where I can post this, but I'll provide it for you. Okay. That's it. Thank you so much for tuning in. You guys take care, and I will talk to you again soon. Take care now.